gonna give you this, Darren.
I'm a very sober woman who has not had psychotherapy.
Yeah, we're not even.
Bring this up.
Her snaps are
You're on
all
Facebook
down.
Live.
They are.
Facebook Live. Facebook
Hey,
Live.
everybody. Oh, I just pressed the button.
Uh-oh. Push. Oh.
Are we still good?
Yeah, we're still good.
Okay, we're still good.
Yeah.
We're still good.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. And welcome back to Talk Recovery Radio. You're listening to us live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. Coming to you live every Thursday. Hello everybody out there on Facebook Live. Hello. And we're powered by New West Recovery, which is made up of Last Door Recovery Center and Westminster House. My co-host Darren Gaylor, who just interviewed the first guest, is our cameraman now, camera person. Hi Darren. Hola. And the second part of the show, we like to talk about personal stories. And today we've got Kimberlea in the studio.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Yeah, it's afternoon. It says don't touch this metal part, and I can't stop touching it. So, anyway, thanks for being on the show. I just had a first show about the 16-step program, and a couple of queasy moments in there. There was some things said about 12-step programs and so forth. Don't you wish sometimes that let's just all get along, everything works, like okay, like I can pull evidence out of any basket I want that says this works, this doesn't work. I mean, anybody that doesn't know that evidence is paid for by whoever's selling the product, doesn't belong on this planet, I think. So, for the people that listen to the first half of the show, there's lots of evidence out there that shows 12-step programs actually do work. You can Google Dr. John Kelly from Harvard. You can Google what is recovery from the Harvard Institute, and there's lots of research out there. So, but we like to air all the pathways, and we want to talk about your story today.
Thank you.
And Kimberlea is in recovery today.
Yes, I am.
Congratulations. How long have you been in recovery for?
3.5 years.
3.5
recovery.
years, everybody. Yay. So you've got quite the story. You're being nominated for an entrepreneur, which is probably, I don't know if maybe you were an entrepreneur back then too. And you got some personal lived experience. So tell our listeners, maybe you can help somebody. You said something really special. You want to be that person that needed to be, like
I want to be the person that I needed to see when I was living in the darkness. That's very important for me. I didn't know I had a problem with drugs and alcohol. I didn't know I had a problem with depression. I thought I was surrounded by people who had problems with drugs and alcohol, and I was the normal person. And I had no knowledge of anything to do with recovery before I came into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I am 12-step based, and this is my first go at recovery, and it stuck the first time.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's been an up and down battle. I didn't work the program as I'm working it now at the beginning, and we'll get into that. But I grew up in Nova Scotia, and I had like a regular childhood, upper middle class family. But I had a couple of traumatic things happen to me in my childhood, and I also had a bit of sexual abuse in my story. But when I was 12 years old, my life kind of took a change where my parents got divorced and I was moved to British Columbia from Nova Scotia. So I started a new school, no friends, and I never fit in. And that loneliness set in and I never felt part of. I always felt like an outcast, and I always was looking to fit in wherever I could. I was a chameleon. So if I was hanging out with this group of people, I would listen to country music. And if I was hanging out with this group of people, I would listen to ZZ Top. But I never really had my own identity. And that continued into my 20s.
And how did you end up? Did you get intervened on? Did you go to treatment? Did you just show up?
I just showed up.
You just showed up.
Yeah. So
willing and happy.
No, I had a 12-year marriage fall apart, and that partner was an alcoholic addict. And he was court ordered to treatment, and I thought good for him, and I thought I wouldn't have a problem after the divorce. And I started dating someone who was sober, which was a really great idea, because if I'm not hanging around with people with drugs and alcohol, I'm not going to do it, because I don't have a problem. They did.
Yeah.
And but what happened was he ended up relapsing into our relationship. And because he had a network of people from his 3 years of sobriety, he was quickly taken back into recovery. And so I was a good girlfriend, and I was going to support him. So I went with him to an AA meeting. And I sat there, and they said, "Would you like to share?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not part of this.
Yeah, no, I'm just visiting.
I'm just visiting with him." And they said, "Okay." And that's the first and only time I've ever said no in recovery. And 15 minutes later, a girl stood up and she told my story. She expressed the feelings that I felt, and I was like, how did she know all of those things about me and my innermost demons? And then she talked about what her life was now, and I was like, oh man, that's what's wrong with me this whole time. I'm actually an alcoholic addict. And it was the first time I actually felt like I had my own identity. Prior to that, I was so-and-so's daughter, the honor roll student, the good athlete, the wife, the mom. I never was just me. I was always an identity based on other people.
So now you show up to recovery, and you're new, and you're changing your life here and so forth. Everybody talks about women coming in and early recovery, and you heard the first half of the show. What was your experience like? You said that you weren't practicing recovery the way you're practicing it now. What does that even mean?
I would go to my home group, because I was told to get a home group every Wednesday night. I would sit in a chair and I would obsess in my head about what I would say if I was picked on. I didn't listen. I didn't have a big book. I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't get connected in with the group for 14 months. I sat in a chair and I left immediately after the meeting, and I didn't drink and I didn't use drugs. And my life got better because I wasn't drinking or using drugs, but it wasn't substantially amazing like all these other people were talking about. I would hear the promises read in the meeting and I would cry, and I was like, oh, that would be amazing. But I didn't put it together because I wasn't really listening and practicing the actual program.
And the program is laid out in certain ways, but there's some people that go to meetings every day. There's some people that go to meetings once a week. There's some people that go to meetings once a month. There's some people that only do it online. So it's that was your journey.
Yeah.
And so when you finished your first set of steps, what did that feel like? Were you empowered? Were you still powerless?
I was empowered. I wasn't completely thoroughly honest in my first set of steps. So I only got half of the result from doing it. Life increased, life got better. Life started to be easier to manage. But I didn't have that spiritual experience they talked about in the book. So I thought I was of the variety that had that slow, gentle spiritual experience. And I just kept doing the next right thing. Still wasn't calling my sponsor, still really wasn't following the suggestions, was just kind of skirting around the outside, doing the bare minimums. And my life got great, but it wasn't amazing.
So now you have a clothing line.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So last summer, I really enhanced my program, and I jumped into recovery with 2 feet, and I made a sweater for a group of step girls, and I posted it on Facebook, and people started messaging me, where did you get that sweater? And I was like, oh, I made it, no big deal. It's just, and so people started asking if I would make them a sweater, and I did, and I met you at the Intoxicated event, and I was a little inspired with bringing mainstream to recovery and ending the stigma. And so I just kept following the guiding of God, and I started a clothing company, and I now have a complete line of women's and men's recovery-themed clothing with catchy slogans, some more spiritual than others. And it's just to help people feel a part of a community. When you have a sweater, you feel part of.
Yeah.
And then you start conversations with people who ask you what that means on your shirt. It's just been amazing.
And it's called, and where can people learn more about it?
It's called Recovered Apparel, so RECVRD Apparel. It's on all social media. It's online. If you Google sober clothing, I think I'm on page 2 for Google now.
Nice.
Yeah, so.
So what do you say to people like, oh, that's against the traditions?
I've had a lot of people question me on my anonymity. I don't run around saying which 12-step program I'm involved in. I am in recovery. And I think it's very important to tell people that you can recover, because people need to hear it. If they're sitting in the darkness like I was and they didn't know that there's another way, they're just seeing Cosmopolitan magazine saying, I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not doing the right things to get a man, but they don't think, well, maybe my life could be better like this girl, because she's telling people, you know, she used to be here and now she's here. And so I just think it's very important to be open and proud about recovery.
Which is the whole Recovery Out Loud movement, Intoxicated, where we met, that's always been a dream to have, the idea of a substance-free space, but more than that, a recovery-friendly that's open to the recovery community, where it's okay to be sober and proud to be sober. Like, it's important because I think what's happened over the decades, like 40 years ago, no one would, I wasn't around back then, but I hardly doubt there was this big movement of don't go to AA, don't go to NA, don't go to, I don't think there was that movement. Today there's a movement. I mean, if you go on Facebook, I mean, there's the silos of healthcare out there, and because of anonymity, which doesn't mean invisibility, nobody was sticking up for their recovery, because we get clean and sober and we move on. We get a job, we pay taxes, and we disappear. Some stay in meetings and some don't. Yeah. And then over the years, which for my job at Last Door, there was this conversation of 12-step programs don't do anything. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like, I was just at an NA convention. There was 70,000 people there. Like, there's an AA convention coming to Vancouver. It's going to be the largest convention Vancouver's ever seen. And then you're sitting there and you're like, well, what do you mean it doesn't work? Of course it does. We exist. And we because of you and your clothing line and our stories and the courage of you to tell your story here, it's getting people to realize, like, yeah, no, we exist. Like,
That's right.
We actually exist.
And there's a big difference between privacy and secrecy.
Yeah.
Like, we can keep certain things private about ourselves. Yeah. And a lot of people may work in a profession where they do need to keep their anonymity. Yeah. But
that's even changing.
That is changing.
That's even changing.
That
like,
is.
I know,
yeah.
like even in the last decade, there's a certain profession out there where you hope the person that's steering this machine is sober.
That's right.
And, back then, people would be like, I could never, like, people can't know. That's slowly changing, where I'm even noticing on social media, people with some pretty safety-sensitive positions out there are starting to share their recovery stories online. And I had this moment, I'm like, that never would have happened a decade ago. No. Like,
and
it
times
wouldn't
are
have
changing
happened.
a lot.
Yeah.
Like, from when Alcoholics Anonymous was born back in the 1930s to now year 2020, times have changed a lot in that big broad time span. And for people living in the darkness and for people who are depressed, part of the thing that keeps them in that space is that they're ashamed and they're embarrassed and they're trying to hide all of these things. But when you kind of start sharing it, it doesn't make it so bad. Yeah. And then you start to hear other people who've experienced the same thing, and then you're not alone. And then it makes it easier to talk about it.
We've got about 5 minutes left.
Yep.
Being a woman in recovery.
Yes.
So a lot of people talk about, what do you say to women out there that it's like, I went to AA and it's a men's program, and it's a program that, because it says man, never says woman, and so forth. What do you say to someone?
The women are making a movement in recovery right now. There is, especially here in Vancouver, there's events coming up that I'm actually a part of. In February, we're having an event called Galentine's, and it's to bond the women together. The men are traditionally the founders of AA, and they have a brotherhood, and there's the folklore amongst them. But there's women that are coming forward and taking roles in recovery, especially here in Vancouver, to say, no, women can have the men's recovery too, and we can bond together in a sisterhood. A lot of the problem with women is that, we're catty and we have jealousy issues and we try to be standoffish with one another, but we need to bond together as sisters and raise each other up. And that's part of the empowerment movement that the first guest was talking about. We can empower each other through recovery and support each other and grow. And there's lots of women that are coming forward right now in recovery in Vancouver especially.
So it's called, what is it called?
It's called Galentine's.
And how does one learn about it, go to it?
Well, if you follow me on Facebook or you follow the Vancouver Lano Club, there's information. So it's February 15th, Galentine's. There's 5 strong women speakers, myself included. And there's a little bit of a seminar about women in business and recovery to help people grow and flourish in their sobriety.
And so now you're also part of this big group on Facebook called Recovery Canada?
Recovery Canada.
Yeah.
So one of my sponsees in AA, Janine, created a support group called Recovery Canada. All you need to join us is...
Man, there's some toxic conversations.
Oh, there's
going
some
on
interesting conversations.
I have a love-hate with it. Sometimes I'm like, I'm unfollowing this stuff because I don't got time for it today. And it's quite interesting when you have 5,000 people with lived experience all in one space without a filter. It's like, right. Oh, shit's gonna go bad, right?
I am a moderator on the site, and it can be, we get some keyword alerts at all hours of the day, but the good thing is it's making a conversation. So if there's new people that are coming into recovery, they can find options. Because the worst thing we want to do is have someone sitting there wanting to get sober or wanting to get clean and not knowing where to go. And I think the best thing about Recovery Canada is that there is that support with other people. And, all we have to remember is to love each other. The goal is the same. We all want to stay clean and sober.
Everything works. Like today, for those of you that missed the beginning of the show, somebody who I've known for over a decade is... got the worst street feet in the world, rubbing his feet at the front door of the studio. We're right in the downtown east side, and it's like, yo, what are you doing, Like, I was here a bit earlier, it's like, I was gonna call an ambulance, but it's just, he doesn't want to go to the hospital.
That's right. And
I'm not gonna tell him to go to a meeting, you know what I mean? I'm like, go to Insight, they'll give you a warm street bath, like we all, I believe everything works. That 16-step program that was on the beginning of the show, it works for a lot of people. Try it out, and if this doesn't work for you,
find what works for you and
do it and all that. And a decade ago, I was against Insight. Like I was like, it's a horrible place. Now I get it. I understand its place. I've changed. I get it.
Yeah.
And I just hope that we can all, stop telling people what doesn't work and just tell everybody everything works.
That's right.
And that's what you said at the beginning of the show. That's what Recovery Canada is all about.
That's exactly what
it's just
about.
Let it all be out there and let people decide what they want.
That's right.
What they want to do.
And if it's not working, try something else. Because there is something that will work for you.
Yeah, there is. There is. So, a couple minutes. You this entrepreneur word. What is that?
So, Mompreneurs is an organization in Canada for moms in business. I joined them 2 years ago through a health and wellness company I was with. And I didn't think I was a businesswoman because I consider myself an alcoholic addict. I don't have the worthiness, and that's changed. And I was at an event and I was nominated for Momprenuer Start-Up of the Year. And I went from 1,200 people nominated to the top 136. And last Friday I was named Startup Business to Watch for 2020.
Oh, good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. I just love being able to bring recovery to the forefront and to talk about it and end the stigma with being a person in recovery. And I've started a podcast that's at the end of the month will launch.
Oh, well, maybe I'll be a guest on
Yes, you should be. Yeah, just, being able to talk about recovery and shed light on the darkness is my
Thanks for being on the show,
Thank
everyone.
you so much for having me.
Thanks for the courage for sharing your story. And we are going to bring Darren back on the air. And Darren's going to close us up here.
Yeah, that's right. Talk Recovery, Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. Stay tuned for World Poetry coming up at 1 o'clock. And this is a shout out to East Lass. Jackie Wilson, your love keeps lifting me, buddy.
That was great, Kimberly. Say bye to all your friends.
Bye.
Thanks, Darren.